I would like to call this House to order. Welcome to the OBEC mock debate round. Contesting this round are Pathumwan Demonstration School on Government and Panjarat High School on Opposition. Before the round begins, allow me to explain the rules of the debate. Each consecutive speaker will be speaking for 5 minutes. After the first minute, you will hear one link like this, signaling that the speaker may be asked points of information. At the 4th minute, you will hear one link like this, signaling that the POIs can no longer be made. At the 5th minute, you will hear two rings like this, to indicate that the speaker's time is up. At 5:20, you will hear three rings like this, as a reminder for the speaker to conclude his or her speech. Reply speeches last 3 minutes and are protected speeches. Hence, no POIs may be asked. The motion on the floor before is, this House believes that social media harms democracy. Without any further ado, I would like to call on the Prime Minister to open the debate here.
In today's debate, we will first let's actually contextualize what social media actually is and examine some of the aspects why social media has harmed democracy and the principles within it. First, the contextualization of social media. Number one, we think that social media has become a very personalized news feed for people to look at their news, right? From the neutralization and the exposing of different aspects within the political world, we think that has been ruined because of the ads and algorithms within these social media, where publishers need to make money from ads, so they need to attract the people within these social medias, so they can gain benefits and gain money from these people. This in turn creates an echo chamber where social political polarization happens. Next, the media, we think that it has become very sensationalized, where they need to fight against the various competitions within these social media platforms, right? So they need to create a very sensationalized news or headline where people are very and extremely attracted to these news, right? This in turn lowers the accountability because of the abundance of informed platforms which aren't fact checked and has no check and balance within social media, right? So now let's talk about democracy. What is democracy? Democracy, we think, is not only about free speech. We think that democracy is giving the people the life they want, where people can pay tax and the government can in turn do the things and provide the needs of these people, right? The principles within democracy. Number one, the representation, where the laws in place represent the people's need. Number two, the accountability, where there's fact checking and there's reliable information from scholars and from experienced people. Next, the participation, where people can participate and discuss with each other about the political world and lead to a better resolution for the country. Number four, the social contract, where the government needs to provide the basic needs which is needed in democracy. So why do we think that? So let's talk about the burden of proof. In today's debate, we'll be showing what is democracy. Number two, why is social media harming the principle of democracy which is needed in the development of the country, and number three, why the principle of democracy is needed in our world. Number one, let's talk about the representation, right? We think that the representation of democracy is being harmed by social media. Why? The aspects in social media of it having become more personalized, we think this is harming the representation because people aren't actually going to be truly informed about the different sides of the left wing, the right wing, because the normal people who watch these news are going to see only the sensationalized headlines where one side presents the facts and what their idea is without actually, because people aren't always black and white. They are derived on a spectrum where they can somewhat believe in some of the aspects within the left wing philosophy or the right wing philosophy. So we think that it's not only we think that social media is harming the representation because people can actually find the representative to represent their ideas and what they need. Next, the accountability is also harmed within democracy because accountability and the news can't actually be relied on. Where fake news exists, where the media is sensationalizing every aspect of the political world. We think that people can really truly be informed and make their decisions based on what they really believe in,
Sorry.
right? So, actually, yeah.
So don't you think that social media is more accessible and there are already regulations in the social media itself, and we see that expressions are very necessary for people and citizens in the country?
We understand that you believe that the accessibility and exposing of news is extremely important, where people can receive news, but we think that the quality matters more than the quantity within people receiving these news. We think that we need to strive for a principled democracy where the development is successfully provided and there's a long-term effect within the representatives who are elected by the people. And we believe that governments should not push agendas based on their beliefs, but the people's belief by the people for the people, right? And we think that a world without this principled democracy would tarnish the democracy, the principled democracy which we need to strive for, because the development of the country isn't because of the people. The people aren't really going to be provided and fulfilled by the social contract which is in place in the law, right? We think that social media is harming democracy, and I've shown why we have proven our burden of proof and why democracy is being tarnished by social media. This is why we are supremely proud to propose. Thank you.
I thank the Prime Minister and now would like to recognize Son, the leader of opposition, to open the opposition's case. Here.
Black Lives Matter, Me Too movement, and the Women's March were all driven by a force called social media. Without social media, these movements would have remained unknown. Social media widens the space for democracy and has brought diversity to the public square. We want to clarify a few things. Social media has never harmed democracy, the people did. Social media is basically a platform that is used to allow people from across the world to share and connect, which we think that is a very important tool for discussion. But before moving on to my arguments, I would like to rebut the Prime Minister. My first rebuttal is on the accountability, where they have mentioned that they don't want people to get misinformed due to fake news. But we see that we are okay with that, and I will tell you why later in my speech. Second, they also said that democracy is the government giving the people what they want, right? And we see that this is mutually exclusive, because on our side, we also allow people to have more access and to reach out to the government more. And my third rebuttal is on the representation. They came up and said that aspects of social media has become more personalized, and this is why we tell you that social media should be a place for free speech. It allows people to discuss and show them different perspectives, right? And so, as side opposition, we support a world that allows people to share their ideas and allow people to exchange their perspectives on the world. We support the freedom of speech. The aim of the opposition bench is, one, to prove to you why a world with social media is more democratic than a world without social media, and number two, how social media is harmed by human behavior and not social media itself. The first thing I'd like to note is that yes, within these discussions there would be conflict and there would be manipulation and obviously fake news or misinformation. But we tell you we are okay with this. We are willing and allowing people to raise their voice, express their thoughts and concerns, and also criticize against the government. By doing this allows society to develop and progress furthermore. With that being said, despite the harms that may cause, we believe the outcome of this is still better. Therefore, in my speech, I will prove to you three main things. Number one, why freedom of speech is an important part of democracy. Number two, why social media is a platform that betters democracy. And number three, why having social media is the best platform for freedom of speech despite the alternatives. In our speech, we will be discussing four main points. I will be discussing how social media is the platform for speech and how free speech is vital for democracy, while my DLO will be discussing about fair representation and well-informed electorate. My first argument, how social media is the platform for free speech. In our modern world, social media has constantly developed with the purpose for people to share what they believe in. Social media allows this to happen across the world and not just in your country or your city itself, right? Social media has again become the driven force behind every political organization, hence results to the modern democracy we have today. With that, it already shows how social media has widened the space for democracy and has furthermore developed the whole country as a whole. Something I'd like to point out is that Facebook or any social media platform never force people to do misinformation or to spread fake news. We agree that this is all for profit, right? But we see that by doing this, the organization gets discredited by themselves, and people would be able to realize that due to the discussion in the comment section or discussion in that social media has. And my second argument is about how free speech is vital for democracy. People often
Before moving on,
People often assumes that after a party is elected, citizens become powerless. And we tell you this is wrong, right? People should have the right to express their thoughts and what they think about the government. And we see that social media is the best platform to do so because it is accessible to most of the country, right? And we also tell you on our side, we think everyone's voice and opinion is important and should not be restricted at any case. Free speech is a fundamental right, especially when it comes to democracy. On our side, we give people a choice to express, and a choice to show their tones and true colors. Without choice, democracy is not democracy. Freedom of expression is essential to bring society together and create change, and this is what we are trying to support. Therefore, a democratic society is when free speech is not restricted, and it is when citizens can express their thoughts and opinions through social media, a platform that is accessible through the whole nation. Thank you.
I thank the leader of opposition and now would like to invite the Deputy Prime Minister here.
With Facebook, Twitter, and various social media sites, we see that democracy is being harmed through the four tenets that my Prime Minister have already stated to you. So, before moving on to my case, let's start with four rebuttals. First, on the fact about accountability regarding fake news. First of all, the leader of opposition start by saying that they're okay with fake news, but we see that that is not the case in modern society, right? Through social medias and through sharing the various sources, we do not know which one is fake. We do not know that a certain news from an alleged site is actually a truth or a verified source. This means that people do actually share fake news, and because of the social media and because of the accessibility effect and because of how it is easy to get information, it actually result in a worsened society, a society in which various people get fake news. And second rebuttal of how they view about how representation is being upheld. We see that the core value of democracy is how people get what they want. We see that this is not actually the case with social media. Why? Because when we scale it up into how the social media play in society, we will see that social media actually leads to political indifference, and with this political indifference is actually a less efficient society, a point of which we will further elaborate in my argument. My third rebuttal about how personalized news feeds and there's actually a place for free speech, right? We see that this is not the case as well. Why? Because this marketplace of ideology is not true to the extreme means. Why? Because they are pushing for this progressive discussion, but this progressive discussion doesn't come in a full unbiased source, because at the end of the day, we are looking at Facebook, we are looking at Twitter, who a lot of people follow what they like, who a lot of users stuck in their own echo chamber. Because I support Donald Trump, I will follow CNN,
follow Fox News. Because I support Hillary, I will follow New York Times. This is the ideology that a lot of people is having in the status quo. And this echo chamber is why there's no progressive discussion. This echo chamber is why people who discuss online through comments we often be one-sided, leading into my fourth rebuttal about the right to expression, right? We see that the most important part about social media and its personalized opinion and algorithm is that people are flooded by confirmation bias. People in the comments are flooded by people of their same ideology, meaning that they are within what is considered a confirmation bias. I believe the same way as another person, leading into an amplification effect of also believing that thing further. So moving on to my argument. My first argument is about how social media leads to political indifference. We see that due to the fact that these social media have sensationalization, is actually no thank you, is actually leading into a socio-political polarization. This means that people are actually getting pushed into either one or another. That is why we see bipartisanship in the US society. You are either a Republican or a Democrat. There's also A or B. This means that when you are a moderate, normal, neutralized individual, there's actually no representation for you. There's actually no politician who actually represent your value. There's actually no Democrat that actually represent a more neutralized conservative point of view. This means that when it's come to a actual parliament, there's actually no passing of the law. This is true through history. In 1970s, the US parliament is actually inefficient by the fact that Republicans parliament do not pass any liberals bills, and similarly when it's a Democrat parliament, there's no passing of conservative bills. Moving on to my second argument about how social media helps the state's development. Through the fourth tenet of democracy, in which is about the social contract, we see that it is also the state's duty to make sure that there is progressive development. And this progressive development is actually comes from the fact that we have progressive discussion, which we already proved that is not existent, but also the fact that people are politically active and that there's a rational representation in terms of the politician. This means that at the end of the day, due to that, we have proved that that people will be politically indifferent, and also that there is no progressive discussion. At the end of the day, there's no progressive development of the society, and that's why we are so proud to propose.
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister and now would like to recognize the Deputy Leader of Opposition here.
We are 21st century citizens doing our very best to interact with a system designed and based on an information technology of a 15th century. This is a quote from Argentinian political activist Pia Mancini. Democracy as a system is rooted in thinking and constraints of over 500 years ago. Every few years, it represents a few to make decisions on behalf of everyone else. However, this system is complicated and it restricts the viewpoint of the citizen. We can choose authorities, but are left out on how decisions are made. The attitude itself alienates citizens, giving them no opportunities to intervene except by protest. People want their seat at the table. People want to have a role in the political debate. This democracy often leads to two outcomes, either silence or conversation. With the political system over 200 years old, it expects us to be passive recipients of the monologue. However, we see that social media can help change this and transform the role of people to become active contributors to the dialogue. This leads to one question: what effect does modern information technology have on democracy? Before moving on, I would like to start by rebutting some of the points made by side government. So they said that fake news is prevalent in social media. However, this is mutually exclusive because in mainstream media we have seen that fake news and also exists so that people will be able to buy, and this point is not should not be taken into account. And another point is that conflict will eventually create change. Another point brought up by side opposition is that examples such as New York Times and Fox News, but don't you realize that both examples given are all mainstream media outlets and are also mutually exclusive in this debate? One final rebuttal is about bipartisanship. They say that social media only has coverage of two parties. However, we see that that is the exact opposite, because we have seen many examples of new parties, new leaders utilizing social media and becoming successful both in Thailand and abroad. So we see that social media will help create diversity in parliament. So moving on, we as side opposition believe that social media has a positive effect on the development of democracy in many ways. Moving on to my first argument about fair representation. In the 18th century, the notion no taxation without representation has been the basis of many democracies and is still today. My first argument is that social media is the best medium for discussion in today's world. One of the biggest problems today is that politicians say one thing and do another. This has caused a rift in partisan trust and undermines the values of democracy. On the first level of analysis, social media allows elected representatives to connect and talk to their constituencies. Many government offices have social media outlets to talk, and this is one of the biggest modern ways to interact with the people. The politicians will be able to connect with the people, both their supporters and opposers, and receive constructive criticism. On the next level, the representatives will be able to bring this information, the people's ideas and values into consideration, meetings, panels, or even the parliament. For the first time ever, politicians will be able to make decisions with those who will be affected by the decisions the most, which is the people. Moving on to my second argument is how a well-informed electorate is the biggest part of democracy. My second argument will focus on the benefit of social media and how it can help the citizenry informed. Nowadays, we have 24/7 coverage of what politicians do and their actions. By having a platform like this, we will be able to expose to a variety of different viewpoints, variety of different standpoints, and that will help make our justification of our decision much stronger. We believe that we should solve modern problems with modern tools that we use in everyday lives, which is social media. So a recent Reuters Institute says that 44% of people in the US who receive news from social media end up seeing sources from both the left and right-wing viewpoints, more than twice the rate of people who don't use social media. In conclusion, we see that as side opposition, social media has played a large part, and wide public access to knowledge, like public education, is one of the pillars of modern democracy, and a guarantee that we will maintain a well-informed citizenry. Thank you very much.
I thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition and now would like to invite Government Whip to conclude the government's case. Here.
Side proposition believes that there is very minimal engagement coming from opposition on the points, on the tenets of democracy that we have presented. But before moving on, let's look at why they failed, and let's look at some rebuttals that proposition has. So number one, right? So let's before do that, let me summarize their case for you. Right, so there's a couple elements to their case. Number one, they believe that social media is the only way people can express and is the only way that you as a citizen or as a constituent can interact with the government. Number one, we think that is absolutely false, right? They have proven themselves that democracy have existed for, for hundreds of years, and there are also other ways that governments can communicate with their constituents. There are other ways that the government or the government officials can understand the individuals or the constituents' needs, right? second rebuttal, right, on how they try to prove that traditional media is also sensationalized. We think that the reason that traditional media has to be sensationalized exactly stems from the fact that there are social media of the birth of the social media. When social media came into place in the early 20th century, we think that there is required an increased competition in order for these media platforms or to attract their viewers. And that is essentially the reason that Prime Minister and the second speaker on my bench has already talked to you. It's the sole reason why media is being sensationalized, right? But let's look at the case as a holistic picture, right? What they try to tell you is that, oh, it's okay because these discussions are going to be productive, it's going to be constructive, and then it's going to eventually lead to a well-informed electorate, right? So let's look at an event, right? Let's look at when, in 2016, when the U.S. elected in Donald Trump, right? Where in 2018, Mark Zuckerberg actually testified before Congress that Facebook actually played a role in help electing Donald Trump into Congress because of the fake news, of the misinformation that's actually spreading in Facebook and in other news feed, right? We think that that example alone and also other example of unchecked news sources where social media is not organization is not being held accountable for the misinformation that spreads across the platform is the sole reason why we think that it doesn't actually create well-informed electorate, but rather creates a misinformed electorate where the votes are being uninformed and where individuals do not receive both sides of the information, right? Creating an echo chamber where the thoughts are amplified as liberal or conservatives, right? And that is why we think that the case, they don't engage on our case on the tenets of democracy and also why it doesn't actually create well-informed electorate, right? Even in take Thailand, for example, right? Now that there's election, now that there's political conversation in Thailand, it's also clear that there are groups specifically for conservatives, for individuals who want to exchange their thoughts for conservatives, that they do not interact with groups, with the new generation of people who have their own thoughts and ideas, right? With labelings, with names that do not actually signals or suggest that there's a progressive conversation and progressive development to the society. And therefore we think that that is the reason why progressive conversation cannot happen. When there's no progressive conversation, positive development cannot happen on their case, right? And that is the reason why we think that the representation is not fair. And that's why someone who's moderate cannot be able, will create political indifference because they feel like their viewpoints cannot be truly represented by the social media or by the politicians in Congress who are increasingly becoming polarized in the ideas of whether liberal or conservatives, right? So let's look at the tenets of democracy and what we support in this debate. We think that our burden here is to tell you why social media harms the tenets of democracy and why is it that it's actually the social media's fault and not the human's fault. This is where we directly clash with them on how they try to claim that it's not the social media's fault. But we recognize that because these social media platforms actually have a profit incentive, right? They are driven by profit. That is why they create these platforms for Facebook or Twitter, that they want to sensationalize their newsfeed. They want to attract viewers. And because of their profit incentive, right? We think that that is why the intention is extremely malignant, and that is why you need to hold these social media platform accountable for the harms that they have presented into harming, undermining the representation, undermining the accountability, and undermining the participation, creating political indifference in our society. But let's look at the bigger picture here. Let's take a step back and look at what does it impact, how does this impact this country as a whole, right? We think that when you are unable, when you have political polarization, number one, my second speaker already told you that it makes it extremely difficult for you to be able to pass policies or push forward ideas or bills that are beneficial to the overall population. Take healthcare in the US, for example, where lawmakers are being forced onto either one side depending on the party that they are on, or in Thailand, for example. And because of that, we think that other policies, that democracy is about living people the good life cannot happen. If you want individuals to have a good life, if you stand for a democratic society, democratic country that actually gives good governance and good life to the people, please vote for side opposition and oppose social media. Thank you.
I thank the government whip, and now would like to call on the opposition whip to conclude the opposition case. Here.
So before moving on, to my rebuttals, let me first clarify to you that, ladies and gentlemen, the purpose of social media is to maintain stability in the society, to maintain unity between people in the countries, to share different perspectives throughout the world, recognize the differences that are held during times. So we strongly believe that social networking would drastically damage the democratic systems. So before I move on to how side government has failed that case, let me first move on to the rebuttals. So the rebuttals to side government is that, firstly, they said they would be tracking using cookies, ads, etc., and the freedom of social media, right? Because there would be polarization in the court, and there would be any checks between social media and the society, right? We see that people would not be able to express their ideas using social media. They wouldn't have the freedom to speech. Social media is made for the citizens to maintain their roles in the society, or they are already systematically evaluated, actually. So the second rebuttal is that representations are harmed, as government has stated. So we see that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. We see that receiving more in hand and is better than receiving like filter messages where everything is always good, everything is like in a good world, right? We don't want that. We also want people who thinks how we could develop in the society as a whole. People voices would be heard in this way. Free speech is essential for the citizens in this way. So there wouldn't be any democratic messages and there would be no discussion in government side. Moving on to the third rebuttal is that this stated about fake news and the same ideology every time. According to BBC, CNN, Twitter, and Facebook, they are all verified, so they would have to get rid of fake news entirely, as state actors already give progressive actions toward the society. Even if citizens have the same ideology, we already intervene, and this is a legitimate form of expression. It gives the U.S. experience about fake news, as like Donald Trump is like right now. There would be awareness, which means that this also raises awareness in the society. So moving on to how side government has failed to prove that social media is not good toward democracy. So the burden of proof, firstly, is that different opinions contain collective ideas and they are unique. So this helps Democrats. The premise on this is that it helps people think on how to solve the problem. For example, news. News help people understand more of the solutions, the effects, the harms, and the solutions. So side government is saying that they would take care of all the news and get rid of all the news. So what are the effects of this? No information on meetings, there wouldn't be any rights for speech, and this ruins democracy entirely.
On that point,
No, thank you. So we have seen examples from China, which with social media, they are more democratic. As we see that there are many social media such as WeChat, Baidu. This is not only freedom of speech, but this is also crucial for promoting assembly, which people take this for granted. Another example is Russia. Russia, you might be thinking of state hackers, a lot of fake news. People, however, in Russia are trying to achieve their goals. The only people who know that we exist are the foreign journalists. Without this, we would be disconnected, and we would never emerge from society. So,
On that point-
before moving on, yes.
recognize that we never said anything against freedom of speech. All we tried to claim was that social media actually harms democracy and actually put forward speeches that are unproductive to the development of the country. Why are you trying to force us to defend that we hate freedom of speech? We never
Because
said
we
that.
said that because your side has stated about like same ideology, and you said that the same ideology harms the democracy entirely, which we see that this also harms your side's case. So moving on to the first clash is that which side provides more of a legitimate solution to this. So on side opposition, we see that we would raise the voices, we would develop, and to make there would be develops to be made, which despite alternatives. Like I already stated about China and Russia, free speech is very significant. It is very essential for people to be taking in this for action. And secondly is that social media is more accessible, as regulations are already known to be taken in action, and expressions are very necessary. Without democracy, without social media, this would never be democracy. However, on their side, they say that they wouldn't be contributing with Democrats, as we see that there is no clear argumentation on this. The Prime Minister had gave no clear explanation, and this is not diverse at all. People would not be able to analyze ideological statements. Secondly, is that they said about fake news, which I would like to clarify once again that this reaches out to the government more, and this gives out different perspectives and different opinions in many ways, and that's why I'm very proud to oppose. Thank you.
I thank the opposition whip and now would like to invite the opposition reply speaker here.
Ladies and gentlemen of the House, we as side opposition believes that social media has had a positive effect on the development of democracy in many ways. The concept of democracy has always been designed to be complicated because it promotes the discussion of ideas and values, which on side opposition can continue to develop with the help of social media. We see that side government has gave us no analysis or whatsoever on how social media directly harms democracy. We tell you, for example, China. It is undeniable that China with social media is more democratic than China without social media. I think we all know that before the internet was introduced in China only had one public voice, one media, and one version of history. But now the Chinese has more freedom, the freedom to express. With that, it allows China to develop more because the government was able to hear the voices of these people through social media. We tell you that side opposition believes that social media should be the main platform in order to express the freedom of speech in order to develop the country as a whole. We never said that social media is the only way, but we tell you that social media is the best way in order to express your thoughts and perspectives. We also have told you many times that we are okay with fake news even though it could be influential and affect elections. Why? On two levels. Number one, mainstream media, for example, Fox News, would get discredit anyways if they spread any misinformation. And number two, even if these people get influence, we still believe that their vote is still a legitimate form of expression. Social media is to maintain a stable community, and we think we already have proven it on the opposition bench because we already have told you so many times how social media could be access to people all over the country and also all over the world. It allows people to discuss their views from different perspectives. People from America, people from Asia, or people from Europe, they are allowed to share their views and how they feel about their government as a whole. And by doing this, we tell you that social media is the vital tool in order to develop the country because not only, like as mentioned earlier, not only that it allows an open discussion, but it allows people to see what you see from across the world. Therefore, without social media, we would not have the change today, and without social media, our country would have not been developed as we are today. Thank you.
I thank the opposition reply and now would like to invite government reply speaker to cross the debate here.
There are two things that both sides agrees. We both agree that free speech is important to democracy. And second is that we both agree that a vote from the citizens is a legitimate vote regardless. But what is actually the question in this debate is, first question in this debate is how free speech is not affected effective through social media. How so? We already proved to you that the nature of social media, from whatever the utopia that the opposition is living in, the status quo that these social media like Facebook, Twitter, and various other social media is actually being profit-seeking corporates. It's about how they want to attract the longest viewer possible, scrolling through the feed so that they can sell ad revenues. This means that they want the feed become personalized, because if I support certain things, it is most likely that I'm going to continue reading the same similar things. This means that when it's come to discussion online, it is most likely that I'm going to be flooded by my own confirmation bias, because I believe in a liberal point of view, meaning it's most likely I'm going to see the Me Too movement rather than the KKK, and it's less likely that I'm going to see the white supremacist ideology in comparison to other movement. This means that discussion online, when it comes to social media, is not actually an effective way, and that's the argumentation that the politicians are having trying to push, is that freedom of speech doesn't actually only come through social media, and the fact that there's social media discussion is actually harmful to democracy. Moving on to the second question, is social media an effective way of getting information? We see that the most important part of social media is that it is spreading news very quickly, and spreading news very quickly is harmful when there's a fake news. When the news that there's a fire in Thai government or whatever the case may be is already being flooded by it's already flooded to hundreds of thousands of people, but in the end it's just becoming a fake news. It's too late to verify that news. And we see that this lack of check and balance is what actually harmful to democracy. Leading to the third and the main question in today's debate is that, does social media actually harm democracy? We already give you the 4 principles of democracy, and that is how there's representation, accountability, participation, and the social contract. We see that these 4 principles is harmed because first, when we think about representation, people do not get fully represented because they are being crowded by their own confirmation bias. Secondly, about accountability. This social media site doesn't hold accountability at all. They do not hold the fact that there's news on the media as actually being fake. This is true when you talk about Mark Zuckerberg being in the court and actually crucifying the fact that Facebook actually have an influence in debate. In democracy. Moving on to the third and fourth, which is what I proved to you, that development cannot come when it is regarded into political indifference. That's why we are so proud to propose.
The House would like to thank both sides of the House. And now please cross the floor and shake hands. Please leave the room to allow the adjudicators to come up with a decision.